5:12 a.m., Engels 2 Air Base, deep inside Russian territory. The night is calm, frozen, routine until it isn't. A white flash rips across the runway, followed by a fireball so bright it turns darkness into daylight. A mushroom cloud of burning jet fuel climbing like a bad omen over Russia's most guarded airfield. One moment, the Tu-160 White Swan is a billion-dollar nuclear dream refueling for a winter terror campaign. The next, it's an expanding cloud of shrapnel, fire, and humiliation. If this base was untouchable, then this explosion wouldn't exist. If Russian air defense was airtight, then the fuel tanks wouldn't be detonating like a gasoline volcano. But here we are. Somewhere in the chaos, sirens scream, soldiers scatter, and someone in Moscow realizes the unthinkable has happened. Time remaining, unknown. Damage assessment, catastrophic. And here's the uncomfortable question: if a strategic bomber can be caught sleeping on its own runway, what else in Russia is about to wake up on fire? Just hours before that fireball rewrote the morning briefing, Engels 2 was advertised as a fortress, a place Russian planners spoke about with the same confidence Wall Street talks about too big to fail. Layer after layer of protection wrapped this base like steel bubble wrap. S-300V4 batteries scanning the sky for high-altitude threats, Nebo-M radars boasting the ability to see stealth aircraft before breakfast, Tor-M, 2 systems waiting patiently to swat low-flying targets out of the air, while Mi-28 night hunters circled lazily, hunting ghosts that were never supposed to exist. From the command bunker, glowing screens painted a picture of total control. Every vector tracked, every altitude covered, every approach supposedly denied. This wasn't just air defense, it was Russian pride rendered in radar returns and missile tubes, a belief that nothing slower than a ballistic missile could ever get close, let alone touch a strategic bomber on the ground. And that confidence felt earned. On paper, this was a kill zone, a no-fly graveyard. But paper doesn't burn fuel, and spreadsheets don't hear explosions. Stay with me, because the difference between invincible and exposed is usually just one assumption, and the Russians built this entire defense on the wrong one. Because sitting on that runway wasn't just an aircraft, it was a receipt. The Tu-160 M2 White Swan isn't a bomber. It's a flying invoice worth over $400 million, polished aluminum arrogance designed to carry nuclear nightmares across continents. Add the Il-78 Metis tanker parked nearby, another $100 million in fuel, plumbing, and logistics, and suddenly this airfield becomes a billionaire's parking lot. Neatly lined up, hoses connected, crews relaxed. Every minute those aircraft sat refueling was a financial heartbeat Russia could hear. Jet fuel flowing, maintenance crews walking between wings the size of football fields, ladders up, panels open. Defenses technically active, but psychologically off. This was the most vulnerable moment in the bomber's entire life cycle, when mobility is zero, fuel load is maximum, and escape options don't exist. And here's the brutal math most people miss. You don't have to destroy the bomber to bankrupt the mission. You just have to light the fuel. One spark turns hundreds of millions into burning vapor, and one destroyed refueling cycle erases weeks of planning, sorties, and political theater. But wait, here's the lethal error. The Russians thought the danger came from the sky they could see. They never considered the sky pretending to be empty. 5:02 a.m., 10 minutes before the explosion, the Russian radar picture looks boring, and that is exactly the problem. Low on the horizon, shapes begin to crawl in like bad weather. Slow, irregular, unimpressive, cardboard silhouettes barely worth a second glance, yet the Nebo-M radar paints them anyway. Faint smudges moving at treetop level, too slow to be missiles, too dumb to be aircraft, too many to be ignored. Somewhere in a bunker, a junior officer clears his throat as the system flags multiple low-altitude contacts. Command hesitates. Then comes the order: engage. The first S-300 missile leaves its tube with a roar that shakes concrete. A $2 million answer to what is essentially a flying pizza box. Time to impact, 14 seconds. The Corvo decoy doesn't evade. It doesn't need to. The missile hits, detonates, and obliterates nothing of value except Russian confidence. High fives follow. Laughter. Another target appears. Another missile fires. Another cheap silhouette vaporized. Stay focused, because this is not air defense. This is Ukraine picking Moscow's pockets in real time. Wave after wave follows, decoys drifting low, erratic, almost mocking. forcing Tu-160 crews to switch modes, burn through ammunition, and stay locked onto ghosts while their targeting computers heat up and their magazines quietly empty. But here is the genius detail most people miss. These drones aren't just bait, they are timers. Each one forces a reaction, and each reaction drains seconds, missiles, and attention away from the only moment that matters. 5:09 a.m. The Russians think they're winning. The radar screen is lighting up with kills. Operators feel smart, safe, in control. But wait, there's one more layer to this trap. Behind the cardboard curtain, further out, flying higher and faster, the real swarm is already inbound, using the chaos as cover, using Russian pride as camouflage, and counting down to the moment when the runway becomes a fuse. And while Russian crews are busy chasing shadows, something else is happening that never shows up on the radar summary screen. Radio traffic spikes, command voices sharpen, procedures slip. A Tu-160 crew hesitates for half a second too long, unsure whether to reassign targets or hold fire. A Mi-28 Night Hunter banks hard in the darkness, hunting a decoy that was never meant to be caught, burning fuel for nothing. This is the moment Ukraine wanted, not confusion, but overload. Sensors saturated. Humans stressed, machines obediently following bad priorities, and in war, that's when defenses stop being a shield and start becoming a distraction. Margin for error, 0. Time remaining, 180 seconds. 5:10 a.m. On the Russian side, the mood shifts from tension to celebration, and that's when the mistake hardens into something fatal. Screens flash green confirmations, targets marked destroyed. Someone claps a gloved hand against a shoulder. Another crew cracks a joke about cheap Ukrainian toys, and a bottle quietly changes hands in the back of the room. In their heads, the story is already written, the base held, the defenses worked, the threat was neutralized. This is where arrogance does the heavy lifting for Ukraine, because every missile fired at a decoy feels like proof of superiority, even when it's actually proof of manipulation. $2 million interceptors are gone. Short-range magazines are thinning. Operators stay glued to low-altitude clutter, hypnotized by slow-moving ghosts, while the systems designed to look far and fast are mentally switched off. Would you reassign sensors now, or keep shooting what you can see? If you were the commander in that bunker, would you admit uncertainty or double down on the illusion of control? But here is the lethal error. The Russians mistake activity for success, noise for security. They think the danger has already passed, because explosions happen where they expected them to happen. They never ask why the pattern feels wrong, why the targets don't evade, why nothing fights back. The answer is simple and humiliating. These drones aren't attacking, they're teaching. They're measuring response times, mapping, firing priorities, and draining the last calm seconds from men who think they've already won. 5:11 a.m. Another decoy dies, another cheer. And just like that, the Russian air defense network locks itself into the worst possible posture, confident, depleted, and staring in the wrong direction. Stay with me, because this is the exact moment Ukraine has been waiting for. The fireworks are over. The real physics lesson is about to begin. 5:11 a.m. and 30 seconds. The radar picture finally changes, but not in a way the Russians are prepared for. New contacts appear higher, faster, cleaner, slicing through the noise like a blade through fog. These aren't drifting ghosts anymore. These are Palyanitsia drones, jet-powered, compact, purpose-built, coming in hot from over 1,000 kilometers away, riding the thin edge between detection and reaction. Time to impact, 45 seconds. Inside the bunker, confidence collapses into motion. Operators shout over each other, trying to reassign systems that were never designed to pivot this fast. Tu-160 crews glance at empty magazines. S-300 launchers sit silent, their million-dollar missiles already spent on cardboard trophies. A Mi-28 Night Hunter banks hard in the darkness, chasing a heat signature that's already outside its envelope. But here's the twist that matters. Ukraine didn't overwhelm the defenses. They exhausted them first. This isn't brute force. This is sequencing. 5:12 a.m. The Palyanitsia dives. Guidance locks onto the brightest, dumbest target on the base, the fully fueled Tu-160 White Swan. Hundreds of tons of kerosene sit patiently behind thin metal walls, waiting. Time remaining, 12 seconds. The drone doesn't slow, it accelerates. The final meters vanish in a blink, and then physics takes over. Impact, detonation. Fuel doesn't burn, it erupts. Pressure spikes instantly, flames race through the tanks, and the blast lifts the bomber's wing as if gravity briefly lost the argument. Shockwaves slam into the runway, flip service vehicles, and punch the air out of nearby buildings. This isn't an explosion. It's a conversion from money into heat, from pride into smoke, from a strategic asset into an insurance nightmare. And in the seconds after the blast, the base freezes. Fire alarms howl in overlapping frequencies. Secondary explosions ripple outward as fuel trucks ignite one by one, each flash another line item added to the bill. Radar screens go blind, washed out by heat and debris. Pilots sprint with nowhere to take off. Ground crews dive for cover as fragments rain down like metallic hail. This is no longer an airfield, it's a liability. A place built to project power is now consuming it, burning Russia's future sorties right where they were supposed to begin. Somewhere in Moscow, a phone rings and keeps ringing. A general stares at a silent screen, realizing a $400 million symbol of power has just been erased by something that never even showed up on the morning threat briefing. Stay focused, because what burns next isn't just aircraft, it's assumptions. 5:12 a.m. and 10 seconds after impact, the science becomes brutally simple. Jet fuel aerosolizes under extreme pressure, mixing with oxygen faster than human reflexes can register, and the ignition front expands outward in a rolling sphere of heat that turns night air into a compressive wall. This is not a Hollywood fireball. This is a fuel air event, where temperature spikes above 1,000 degrees and overpressure snaps doors, windows, and ribs of metal in a single violent breath. The blast wave slams into the Tu-160's fuselage, collapses internal compartments, and sends fragments outward at supersonic speed. Aluminum skin peels back like foil. Landing gear shears clean off. The shockwave rebounds off hardened concrete, reflects, and stacks on itself, amplifying damage to everything unlucky enough to be parked nearby. Service vehicles flip. Fuel hoses rupture. Secondary tanks ignite in sequence. Cause becomes effect, becomes escalation. Inside nearby structures, the pressure drop is just as lethal. Air rushes back in, dragging debris, glass, and unsecured equipment with it. Ears rupture, lights go out, screens go dark. For a brief moment, the entire base exists inside a physics experiment nobody volunteered to be part of. The mushroom cloud rising above Engels 2 isn't symbolic. It's thermodynamics made visible. Hot gases climbing because gravity can't argue with heat. And this is the detail only engineers obsess over. The damage radius isn't circular, it's directional. The refueling configuration channels the blast along the runway axis, turning infrastructure into shrapnel and magnifying destruction exactly where takeoffs were supposed to happen. This isn't just a loss of hardware, it's a shutdown. A base designed for projection is now a case study in vulnerability. Time since detonation, 40 seconds. Operational capability, 0. Now step back, because this is where the math turns cruel. Ukraine didn't need bombers, air superiority, or a trillion-dollar defense industry. What they spent was pocket change by Pentagon standards, cardboard decoys in the tens of thousands, swarm drones in the low six figures, and one jet-powered finisher cheaper than a luxury SUV in Los Angeles. What Russia lost is easier to count because it hurts more. A Tu-160 worth over $400 million, a refueling cycle erased, fuel reserves incinerated, ground infrastructure damaged, a strategic strike canceled before it even began. Conservatively, this was $1 billion morning turned into smoke before sunrise. That's not a setback. That's negative ROI so extreme it would end careers on Wall Street. But here's the real checkmate. This strike forces behavior change. Bombers can't relax. Refueling can't linger. Bases deep inside Russia are no longer safe havens, they're liabilities. Every future sortie now carries delay, dispersal, and paranoia baked in. Ukraine didn't just destroy hardware, they rewrote the risk equation. This is David versus Goliath, not with luck, but with spreadsheets. When a $50,000 drone erases a $400 million symbol, power stops being about size and starts being about thinking faster. So here's the question that matters. If you were funding this war, which side looks smarter, the one buying bigger toys or the one turning math into fire?